Hey everyone, welcome to the first week of the new year. Happy New Year, by the way, 2026. Can't believe 2025 flew by so fast. I can't believe it's January already. But here we are. So happy New Year, everyone. Yeah, sorry that the first tasting of the new year is a recording, not an actual Zoom tasting. But while you are watching this, I am actually will be in Chile, in Patagonia, in Chile, in Temuco, doing my annual cycling trip. I will be exactly halfway through, or I will be I'll be on my third day, so exactly halfway through of that cycling trip. So yeah, I didn't know what the internet situation was going to be like, and I also didn't want to do a tasting at 10:30 at night in the middle of my bike cycling trip. So here I am sending out a recording instead. So excuse me, you gotta forgive me for the in not being so personal with the with the first tasting with of the year. But anyways, just a few announcements before we get started. But the Case Club will open up tomorrow. You'll get an email, but it's the one with the hits from the past. So you should have all gotten an email from me with all the wines that we featured in 2025. If there's anything there, as well as anything from the past that you want to request to see it featured again, let me know and then I'll find out. But all of that will open up tomorrow. So just watch out for that email. And you should all gotten an email from me about Bojbox as well. But all the Bojbox invitation as well as invoice and all of that should have gone out. So go ahead and take care of that if you haven't already. I don't know as of right now. So I'm recording this on December 29th. So I don't know as of now, between now and when this goes out, which will be next Wednesday, if all the Bojbox slots were filled. But as of right now, I have 5 spots open still in the box, and then there's still about 15 people that I'm waiting to hear back from. So whoever gets in first, so let me know if you're still interested. But I will wrap that all up as soon as possible. But anyways, if you signed up for it, you should have gotten an invoice/email from me. So if you express interest but you did not get one, let me know ASAP, and I'll figure something out. All right, so that's pretty much all the announcement I got. His from the past and Bojbox, get that all rolling. But besides that, let's get into the wine. Yeah, this month is super fun. This is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to put together. I also, admittedly so, knew very little about this region. I've never really had much exposure to this. Honestly, I have really not seen much of it on the wine list. Never really worked with this region. I've had them a few times here and there, but never. I'm not familiar with them. So this was kind of like scratching my own curiosity. Just wanted to see what this region was all about. Just also one of the importers based out of Baltimore is actually bringing in one of the kind of premium but very small producers from this region, and that's kind of what inspired me to kind of put it together, to curious enough to kind of see what else is available. This was not an easy box to put together, and then we'll talk more about that once we get into it. But we're essentially in Valle, the valley, the Aosta Valley is essentially where we are this month, which is up on the northwestern part of Italy. But anyways, what we're tasting today and what we're kicking off the month with is this guy, first of all. So 2023 Grosjean Torrette is what we are tasting today. And I mean, this right here already tells you everything that we're about to talk about, which is, I mean, look at the name Grosjean. I mean, that's not an Italian last name. You know what I mean? That is very French, essentially. But we're in Italy. So we're northwest Italy. You will all get this, Italian map on your in your email. But it's all the way up on the northwest. You see Piedmont, but above Piedmont, there's a tiny little yellow sliver all the way up in the mountains in the Alps, butting up against the Switzerland and France. There's a little part called Valle d'Aosta. Tiny region, and that's where we are this month. We're spending an entire month basically exploring that region. I have also included a more or narrower or more specific wide map of that region. So there are 2 sections up top. It kind of tells you divides into that different cities. It lists out different cities, but as you can see over there, they are so essentially to the northwest, and then west of Valle d'Aosta is France, and to the northeast is essentially Switzerland, and you see right there Monte Bianco, which is Mont Blanc, right? The peak on the northwestern part is right there. And then all the way on the northeastern part, you see Matterhorn, or they call it Monte Cervino. So as you can imagine, it is a very, very mountainous region that we're talking about. And then south is covered by Piedmont. So we essentially in the western Alps of Italy. This is essentially where we are. As you can see, it kind of divides into 3 regions: the Alta Valle, Valle Centrale, and Bassa Valle. So lower valley, central valley, and upper valley. As you go more west, essentially the elevation gets even higher. And then as you see the town of Morges and La Salle, that is essentially at the base camp or at the lower foothills of Mont Blanc. So we're talking about a very, very mountain. We're talking about mountain wines. We talked about, when we do Jura and Savoie, we're talking about mountain wines. We're very much talking about alpine mountain wines is what we're talking about here this month. If you go to the map underneath, this divides out the Valle d'Aosta's winemaking sub-regions. So you got the pink region on the left, the Blanc de Morges et de la Salle. That is the highest peak, the highest elevation vineyards in all of Europe is in La Salle. So we're talking about a very high elevation sites here. And then there's RVA, and then moving Aosta. And then there's that kind of yellowish, right to the southwest of Aosta. That is Torrette, and that is essentially where we are today. So this one is Torrette, as it says right here, right on the bottle, and that's where we are. As you can see, this is essentially, as the name suggests, Valle d'Aosta, Aosta Valley. Aosta is a city in the middle of this valley, and then we're just following this glacier valley that is carved up by old glacier, but there's actually a river that runs through it here, which is Dora Baltea. Is a river that runs through this valley, which is a tributary river to Po River, which is the very famous river that flows through the Piedmont, Barolo, Barbaresco, that region as well. So this little sliver, this is about 45 miles total. So we're talking about distance between this entire wine region, between here and Baltimore, essentially. Very narrow strip just on the valley floor. And just because, as we've talked about many different wine regions in the world, anytime when you go to a valley, especially Glacier Valley, the valley floor is full of this alluvial soil from all the melted glacier water and all this stuff, so it's very, very fertile, so which is not great for viticulture. So oftentimes the best viticulture sites or the vineyards are actually found in a lower foothills off the valley floor, going up into the hills, and sometimes much higher. So we're talking about vineyards that are built into the very steep sides of these mountains, and that's basically where we are. And these mountains are essentially what gives this place a very unique kind of a microclimate and what makes it possible. So because it's surrounded in all sides, Valle d'Aosta is a valley, right? And it flows through, and in all sides it's surrounded by alpine mountains, the Alps. So it kind of protects it from this rain during the summertime, and so you get this really dry, warm summer climate that is perfect for ripening the grapes and growing the perfect growing condition during the summer essentially. But at nighttime, it gets super cold because it's so high up in elevation, right? It's a diurnal shift that temperature difference between daytime and nighttime is huge. So you get this summertime, they're all planted on the slopes, south facing, so you want to get as much sun as possible because it's up at the elevation and it gets cold. And they've also done other things like, to keep the canopy of the vineyards a little bit lower to the ground, so all the heat that is retained in the soil. And this is basically granite and a schist soil, so very rocky soil here as well. So all those rocks absorb the heat during the day, and then they kind of reflect it back onto the grapes at night, so keeping it not as cold because it does get pretty cold at nighttime. So they do things like that to make sure that to help with the ripening and growing. But again, that diurnal shift is what gives it this incredible freshness, acidity without lacking any ripeness here. And wintertime here does get pretty damn cold. It snows, obviously, it's the Alps. It gets very cold, and as you can imagine, it's a very, very popular ski town and resort town as well. I have included some pictures in the email as well. But yeah, if you look at the Valle scenery picture, that's kind of what it looks like. That's what the valley, and then you can see these steep slopes that go up on the side, and the town that's in the middle of it, as well as there's also a vineyard picture. This is snow-covered vineyard, but this is essentially what it looks like in the wintertime when it's been snowed in. And then we'll talk about, there's another picture called Heroic Vineyard, and you can look at that to kind of get a sense of what the scenery looks like. I mean, it looks beautiful out here, but you can also imagine how difficult this must be, and then we'll talk about why it's called Heroic Vineyard. But anyways, so the Valle d'Aosta is the least populous and the smallest wine-producing region in all of Italy. It's about 1/8 the size of Piedmont, and Piedmont is not necessarily a huge region either. And then, though, as I mentioned, some of the world's highest elevation vineyards exist here. The highest elevation vineyard in Europe is definitely here in La Salle, but one of the highest elevation vineyards exists here in the world, also exists here. The border by France and Switzerland, like I mentioned, up on north and the northwest and the northeast, their influence is seen in food, wine, language, culture. I mean, this is where I think French is the second language. There are a lot of road signs that are written in France. And this is what's really fascinating as a wine people here, because, wine is food, wine reflects a culture, history. We talk about this a lot, but like, even the wines here, it's got this kind of rusticity of Italian wines, but these kind of like with a lot of French sensibilities. These are like French wines or Swiss wines, which are very similar to French wines that are made in Italy, which is exactly what Valle d'Aosta is. So fascinating place. But historically speaking here, I mean, the Romans are here, right? Romans conquered all of France, Italy. I mean, they were everywhere in Western Europe. And some Eastern Europe as well. But after the fall of the Roman Empire, essentially the Aosta was ruled by the Kingdom of Burgundy. So that's where the French influence comes in. Then essentially it was ruled by the royal family of Italy called the House of Savoy. And it remained under their rule until the Italian unification happened in 1861. So their hands, historically speaking, it was first in French control, and then later on it went on to Italian family, and then until the Italian unification happened. But also much later on with Mussolini era, where people cracked down on a lot of French-speaking people here, where they thought there were spies from France during World War One. So there's some ugly history of Mussolini and the fascist government coming in and cracking down on the French culture and all of that. But anyways, nonetheless, all that is to say, their coexist this kind of duality of both French and Italian here, and which is what makes this wines here really, really not only good because of there's a quality wines, just where it comes from, it really, really reflects the terroir and that high elevation of mountain wine. But it is also, it has got this kind of duality of both Italian and French, which is super fun and fascinating as well. So, though technically it was never part of France, but the region maintains its kind of strong cultural ties to them. They do have a bilingual Italian-French kind of identity, like I mentioned, and then there's also a language there, local Franco-Italian kind of a dialect called Valdotine. It's I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm pretty sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. But that is a local dialect, a local language that is like half Italian, half French. And then a lot of places are written in French. So I'm really fascinated by this region. I really want to go visit it. Not only does it look beautiful, but culturally it sounds very interesting. And then wines are delicious. So yeah, there you go. The place here is almost too mountainous for any agriculture here. So oftentimes what you see is cattle grazing. So a lot of cattle raising here. A lot of good cheese comes out of it because of it. And then viticulture. And obviously the ski tourism, and then during summer season, mountain biking, hiking, and all of that. But the wine scene here is fascinating because there's not only these kind of Burgundian grapes, as you mentioned, because of the French influence, a lot of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay being grown here. A lot of Swiss also made grape varieties have made it here. But Chasselas, but really what we're talking about is, and what is really starting to put Valle on the map, are these indigenous varieties that have really started to grow here or have been growing here for centuries, and they're finally getting their varietal bottling. They're really focusing on that as opposed to international varieties or French varieties, and that is what's giving this area its very kind of unique wine identity. And then given this kind of a dramatic topography, right? This whole mountainous region that's not suitable for agriculture. And then the size of very small size of the place. It's essentially full of family-operated small wine growers. It's not a place where you're going to see huge, million hectares of land being farmed all at once. It's all just smattering of just little growers here and there. In fact, this stat I pulled up says nearly 70% of growers own 0.2 hectares of vines or less. And oftentimes they have multiple parcels, even those 0.2 hectares, that are strewn kind of throughout the valley, not in one place. So we're talking about a very fractured kind of a trade structure. So a lot of people, when you come here, you're going to find a lot of small people who are essentially also just growing grapes, not necessarily making wine. And then very small percentage of maybe a quarter of the people are actually bottling their own wines. So given that fact, there's a robust kind of co-op activities here. In fact, 3/4 of the Aosta wine pretty much produced by several cooperative wineries, which between them have about 450 grower members from what I gathered. So very much of a lot of small fractured things, and then they're being pulled by co-ops to make wines. And most of it is being consumed domestically or locally in that region. It doesn't really make it out. So this is really like under the radar. Honestly, I don't remember hearing about Valle d'Aosta all that much, before 10 years ago. It's really recently that I started popping on my radar, but it's still very much under the radar, underappreciated. But the quality of the wines are fantastic. But because it's so small and there's not much wine being made, it's hard to find, and there's not much being making its way to the U.S. and not only much of it making way anywhere besides locally there. Period. Let's see. In terms of what's grown there, like I mentioned, you're gonna find the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Gamay. They're all there, but there are also these indigenous varieties, and we're going to talk about that today. What we have today is a Petite Rouge, dominant blend. So Petit Rouge. There's also I'm sorry, Prix Blanc. That's where it's grown on Morgex, and that's all the very highest vineyards up top. There's also Fuman, Mayolet, Cornelane, Petit Arvine. So all these different things. And this month we essentially have Torrette, which is a Petit Rouge. This is probably like the most quintessential kind of a Valle d'Aosta wine. Torrette. It's a blend of Petit Rouge blend, dominant with other indigenous varieties thrown in, and then as well as a Petit Arvine, Mayolet, and then we have a varietal Petit Rouge thrown in there, not a blend, but a little different. That's the bottle with the Chinese writing, and you may be asking why the hell is there a Chinese writing on a Valle d'Aosta wines? There's a whole story behind there. It's not a great story, but like I just really like the wine. But yeah, I also found it odd that there was a Chinese writing on there. But we'll talk about that when we get there next week. But yeah, so some of these are the local varieties that are grown there, and that's what's really putting this region on the map. And these are pretty much exclusively grown in Valle d'Aosta. I don't know of any other region in the world where I've heard Petit Rouge, Petit Arvine, Mayolet, Fuman, Cornelane. So oftentimes you find these old indigenous varieties, but somehow they've made it to New World through missionaries or whatnot. But in this case, really, even within Italy, I don't know anywhere else that's grown here. Nothing in Swiss either, nothing in the French area. Like you would think maybe Jura and Savoie may get some of these in there, but you don't see this really anywhere except for right here, Valle d'Aosta. So we're talking about very unique, kind of its own style of wines here. What we're talking about. Speaking of Torrette, real quick. So Torrette is a region, not a wine grape, like I mentioned in the map. By law, it must have to contain minimum 70% Petit Rouge, with the Fuman, Dolcetto, Gamay, Pinot Noir, Viandinus, all those making up the rest of the blend. There are other regulations such as maximum yield limit and minimum alcohol level and minimum aging in wooden barrels and all of that. But really, what you should know is that it's at least 70% Petit Rouge. So anytime you see Valle d'Aosta Torrette in a wine store, know that it is a Petit Rouge dominant blend with some other indigenous varieties and introduced varieties thrown in there, at least making up 30%, or at max making up 30%, but oftentimes less. This is actually 80% Petit Rouge and 20% others. So let's talk about who makes this wine. The Grosjean family traces the roots back to the village of Fournay in the high mountain passes of Valle d'Aosta, where they raise cattle, cultivate grapes, chestnuts at lower elevation to produce wine for the long alpine winters for themselves. And this is straight from their website, but I guess the first appearance of the Grosjean family name was around the 16th century. After the plague hit the region in 1630, the population was drastically reduced. So the Duke of Savoy requests that family from Burgundy and Savoy moved to the Valle d'Aosta to repopulate the area and work the land, and that's when the Grosjean family's name appeared. So they settled on the Embers side of the valley, and then they cared for the abandoned land there for decades. And after decades of hard work, I mean, can you imagine living in this area in 1600s with no infrastructure, just snow-capped mountains, very marginal weather? Yeah, it must have been difficult. But after decades of living here and taking care of the land, they actually came to possess an important amount of land that was suitable for the production of wine. So they mostly made it for family consumption, but the record did say that they did sell it to others time to time, but majority of the time it was mostly for themselves. Many centuries later, the Grosjean family name slowly kind of faded until the appearance of their current generation's grandfather, Dauphine Grosjean. So I have a picture of Mr. Dauphine Grosjean in there as well. So in 1969, I guess Dauphine presented his wine at a local expo, wine expo, and then he earned widespread recognition. And yeah, a lot of people liked his wine. So he was inspired to make more wine, better wine. So he recruited his family and expanded vineyards and then fully focused on they did keep some of the orchards that they had, but they pulled out converted a lot of their orchard production into viticulture to fully focus on viticulture after realizing that his wines were good. So for the next few decades, that's what they're focused on, just planting more vines and producing better wines. And then his 5 sons, the second generation, and I have a picture of them in there: Vincent, Giorgio, Marco, Fernando, and Eraldo, all joined the family business. And then in 2018, the winery gets passed on to the third generation of Grosjean. So Hervé, Didier, Simon, and Marco is passed on to them. And there's a picture of the entire Grosjean family with the Dauphine Grosjean in there as well. But apparently, those are all brothers, sons, cousins. They're all Grosjeans. Every single person in that picture, his last name is Grosjean. So this is truly a family matter. I couldn't find like one single name which Grosjean was in charge, but even when you go to their website, they name each one of them, what part of the winery they're in charge of or what they do. Some are like mechanics and runs the basically tractor in the vineyards. One of them is actually a full-time doctor and actually opened a clinic, and he also works at the winery on the side. The Simon, so one is a carpenter. It's like everybody in the family just is involved in this business in one way or another, whether it's full-time, part-time. So yeah, I guess it's truly a very incestuous traditional family affair here. But anyways, today they spend 7 hectares across the valley, including some of the most famous crus of the valley, Aosta Valley. So again, they've been making wines for 50 plus years, been here since 1600s, and now they have 7 hectares of vineyards. And most people have less than 0.2 hectares. So we're talking about, 7 hectares must seem like they're a big enough company. Like they're a giant in this valley. In fact, with 7 hectares, which is nothing in the wine world, right? Anyways, so besides Petit Rouge, Gamay, Pinot Noir, Petit Darvin, they also grow some other indigenous varieties like Fuman, Cornelin, Permetta, Viromin. So all these things. Again, most of these indigenous varieties, I have no idea what they are. I've never even tried them. Like Fuman, I had for the first time like a few weeks ago. Same thing with Mayolet. So all these things were also very foreign to me, but it's been very fun checking it out. It's very unique. It's in its own expression and style. The estate has been farming organically with no pesticides or herbicides, relying solely on native yeast and fermentation since 1975. So very much of a hands-off, very minimally interventionist winery. They received the organic certification in 2011, and apparently they were the first to do so in Valle d'Aosta and the only one to hold that certification for the following decade. Which I find it really interesting because the fact that it is very dry and hot in the summertime, you would think that they wouldn't need so much pesticides and herbicides and all of that, but maybe not. Maybe just the way it's been farmed, and nobody really cared to go back. But yeah, anyways, now it's turning around quite a bit. But yeah, for the longest time, they were the only ones with the organic certification. All right, so what is this wine? Like I mentioned, Torrette has to be at least minimum 70% Petit Rouge. In our case this week, this is 80% Petit Rouge, 20% Viendenoise, Duchette, Fuman, and Mayolet. Don't worry, I also don't know what most of those grapes are either. We do have a varietal Mayolet in the box, but yeah, that is a lot of those all indigenous varieties here. grown on high elevation. We're talking about 550 to 650 meters. And talking about Petit Rouge, native grape of Valdeosa, a lot of people confuse it or think that the Rouge de Valle in Swiss is also the same grape variety, but there's actually genetic testing show that they're not. So it is the indigenous variety of this region. Again, we're in Italy, yet the indigenous variety is called Petit Rouge, to give you an idea of that French influence in the area. It adds color and aromatics to the blend. Petit Rouge on its own is not necessarily super high in acid. So it's usually used in the blend with others to kind of bump up that kind of freshness and acidity. And then what a Petit Rouge lends is the color, as well as this kind of a floral aromatics and bouquet to the wine. As far as technical information goes, it's all pretty much straightforward stainless steel fermentation, and then it's aged in mixture of stainless steel and old barrels. Like I mentioned, with Torrette, you have to age the wine at least 6 months in barrels. So you get a mixture of both stainless steel and old barrels here in this wine. Minimal sulfides. Could not find any information on filtering or fining, but I'm willing to bet that this wine has not been filtered or fined. Earlier, I wanted to talk about the heroic viticulture. There's a picture that I included in there, heroic vineyard. So what does that mean? And there's certain